Christopher Nolan's Interstellar was released this past month, and the mind-blowing film has taken the industry by storm. The movie is also being praised by the science community for its accurate depiction of space travel and theoretical astrophysics, including the theory of general relativity. The general public is colloquially familiar with the theory of general relativity, as well as Einstein's more ubiquitous equation, but the theory of relativity can be a little meaty for even the most heady filmgoers. A lot of film narratives use the ticking clock device to create suspense by having the story's characters race against time. Interstellar utilizes this technique superbly by using a theory of gravitational time dilation, a theory I find to be mind-boggling. The gist of time dilation is that gravitational forces distort space and time. Yeah, how can gravity change time? Time is just seconds and minutes and hours, but that sits right there. It's not just minutes and seconds. Minutes and seconds is how we measure our relative perception of time. Time is relative. This is why scientists say that time travel is theoretically possible, not by speeding up time, but by speeding up our perception of relative time, just like going to sleep or putting some hamburger meat in the freezer. We don't perceive sleeping, not the whole 7 or 8 hours. Every time you wake up in the morning, you have traveled through time, both perceptively and physically. When you sleep for 8 hours, we age for 8 hours. This highlights the premise of time travel as we think of it. How can we travel 8 hours into the future without becoming physically 8 hours older? How do we travel 1,000 years into the future without dying 950 years before we get there? That's where hamburger comes in. Let's say you have 3 packages of hamburger meat. Let's call them David, Jeff, and Carl. Imagine we put David on the counter, we put Jeff in the refrigerator, and we put Carl in the freezer. Which one will spoil first? David. Self-explanatory, right? But imagine if Carl was taken out of the freezer after 2 days, and he sees his friend David rotting on the kitchen counter. What would he say? He'd say, "Hey, what happened to Dave? He was fine 2 minutes ago." 2 minutes. Exactly. Carl is not aware that 2 days have passed because he's been frozen. Frozen meat does not decompose. If dead meat could think, it wouldn't be able to think in a freezer, not at the same rate. Imagine instead of meat, you have a cryogenically frozen astronaut. The astronaut will wake up from a deep sleep with no perception of time that has passed. He will also not have aged either. He has traveled through time perceptively. We don't think of the refrigerator's power so much because we take advantage of the fact that cold exacts a force on food that slows down the rate of decomposition. Gravity works in a similar way. We all know that gravity is the force that keeps our feet on the ground, but we're so used to walking around upright and moving all the time that we don't realize that gravity affects our every movement. But not only that, also our very presence. Gravity controls how much force it requires to stand up or raise our hands. The force we exert against gravity and the strength of gravity determines how long it takes to complete an action, including every little chemical reaction in our cells, such as aging. Gravity determines how fast we age, but it doesn't change how we perceive it. Your understanding of how long it takes you to stand up has little to do with seconds and minutes, and more to do with how relatively long you assume it takes you to stand up on a normal basis. In Interstellar, the crew of astronauts are really cautious about approaching a planet that hovers in the orbit of a supermassive black hole. The black hole is so dense that its gravitational force slows down the perception of time to a pace of 1 hour to every 7 years on Earth. Meaning, for every hour the astronauts spend near the black hole, they risk never seeing their loved ones on Earth again. The astronauts spend several dangerous and ultimately fruitless minutes on the planet. When they return to the space station, 23 years have passed, and their compatriot who stayed on the station has aged considerably, and the years of solitude have worn on his psyche. Back on Earth, the main character's children have lost hope of ever seeing their father again. Time has left this man behind, and all he did was touch down on the planet and return after a few minutes. Which leads me to postulate, a black hole would be a great place to store hamburger meat.